Hi everybody, I am back in Toronto recently, so just doing another Patreon video today for the patrons on the tier which subscribes to the videos and above. And the comic strip that we did this month is another one about Socrates and Xanthippe. So I wanted just to talk a little bit about that and a little bit more broadly about Socrates. I just did an event where I kind of mentioned this actually a couple of days ago in Toronto. I did the book signing and we had a good crowd there. And I'm becoming more and more interested in Socrates. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to write about Socrates. But at the moment I'm working still on Marcus Aurelius, mainly on a graphic novel about him, which hopefully we'll get into properly soon, but we're still kind of working on the proposal stage for that. So the comic strip about Socrates shows Xanthippe kind of ripping his cloak off, and Socrates is kind of looking a bit startled. And this is an anecdote from Diogenes Laertius, and if I remember rightly, there are some people observing that say to Socrates that he should teach Xanthippe a lesson, and Socrates' response is just to kind of make a joke out of it, and also to say, well, why would I want to do that? Is it just for your entertainment? It's also kind of an insightful thing to say, like they're egging him on. And he's, his observation is really they just want to see a fight happen. Like it wouldn't actually achieve anything constructive. And when we were doing this strip, we were kind of worried that Socrates maybe comes across looking a little bit passive. So we doctored it slightly and added some comments before and after, because I'm pretty sure that's not really the message that you're meant to take from this anecdote. So at the beginning we said Socrates loved Xanthippe. She was also a good wife and a caring mother, but notoriously quick-tempered. And then we added that Socrates never engaged in quarrels. He was known for avoiding doing that and being a kind of peacemaker in general. And he judged people based on their overall character rather than on temporary appearances. So we know that from other anecdotes. In particular, in Xenophon, there's a particular dialogue where Socrates uses his trademark question and answer method and goes into this in a little bit more detail when he's talking to his eldest son, Lamprocles, who's also having some problems with Xanthippe and her famously quick temper. And actually, one of the reasons that Socrates stays married to Xanthippe and isn't more frustrated about this, I think is particularly important in this day and age. Even over the course of my lifetime, it seems to me, and I think many people of my generation have noticed this, that more and more it feels as if people are quick to judge in society and to cut each other less slack sometimes. And Socrates is kind of cutting Xanthippe some slack here for a reason, because he says elsewhere, look, she's a good mother, she's a good wife, he loves her, and sometimes she loses her temper, and sometimes she can snap at him, sometimes she throws buckets of water over him, sometimes she rips the shirt or cloak off his back, but that's not what she's like in general. I think if that's all she did, then Socrates would be quite entitled perhaps to find another wife or something, or or to be a bit more concerned about the relationship. Although he does say that living with her is like being a horse trainer with a spirited horse. There's this kind of pun on her name, Xanthippe, which means yellow horse. But really the whole picture here is of a relationship where Socrates has a wife that he cares about and loves and thinks is a good wife and a good mother, but who occasionally can be a little bit abrasive and he throws things at him and stuff. So Socrates is saying, these are isolated incidents, and he's basing his reaction to her by seeing these within a broader context. He's judging her personality as a whole in a more rounded way, which is definitely something that I think people would benefit from doing more today. So it's often the case that somebody might make what seems like an off-colour remark in modern society, and it seems that kind of be, what really matters, the Stoics would say and Socrates would say, is the intention behind it. Because there are always situations where people say and do things and they can't read other people's minds or judge how it's going to come across necessarily. So interacting with other people, there's always a degree of uncertainty. There are cultural differences, for example, generational differences, and so on. Sometimes it's difficult for people to read each other's reactions. And I feel like there was a time when people cut each other a little bit more slack in that respect. Whereas, now, people can be, maybe it's the internet or something, or like jumped on for individual remarks taken in isolation, like tweets and things like that. So Socrates and the Stoics would say what really matters is someone's intention, and to judge someone's intention is difficult. We kind of have to know more about their character as a whole. And so he talks to Lamprocles about this in great detail in a dialogue, and he establishes through question and answer with him that Lamprocles is certain that his mother loves him and cares about him and has his best interest in heart, but sometimes she can be kind of abrasive and lose her temper with him. And so Socrates convinces Lamprocles that even when she snaps at him, although maybe that's not the right way to deal with the situation, nevertheless, she wants to help him. She's trying to do him good rather than harm him. So it's a fascinating dialogue in the Memorabilia. And this is another anecdote from Diogenes Laertius, which I think has to be viewed as part of that bigger picture in relation to the other comments that we know Socrates made about relationships, and in particular about his wife. So there are a couple of other things that I mentioned here. There's another anecdote in Diogenes Laertius about Alcibiades, who said that the scoldings of Xanthippe were intolerable, and Socrates said that he got used to it like the continuous rattle of a windlass. And that may be incidentally a reference to Socrates' previous profession as a stonemason and a sculptor. Maybe that was a piece of equipment that he used as a stonemason, perhaps like a winch. And Socrates says to Alcibiades, "You don't mind the cackling of geese?" Alcibiades says, "No, because they furnish me with eggs and goslings." And Socrates says, "But Xanthippe is the mother of my children." Your geese cackle, but you don't, you're not bothered by it because you think it's just something that they do and you value them. And Socrates says, "I value Xanthippe. She's a good mother. She's a good wife. It's just occasionally she can have a bit of a sharp tongue on her." And there's a quote from Epictetus, I want to mention. I love telling people about this. He says something really quite stunning, quite remarkable about Socrates. So Epictetus, remember, is talking to his Stoic students, and he says, "This was the first and chief peculiarity of Socrates." So he's saying this is the most important and the most striking thing about Socrates. The most important thing about him. Never to be irritated in argument, never to utter anything abusive, anything insulting, but to bear with abusive persons and to put an end to the quarrel. If you would know what great power he had in this way, says Epictetus, read the Symposium of Xenophon, and you'll see how many quarrels he put an end to. But we have the Symposium of Xenophon, so we can all read it. And it's worth reading. So sometimes people say what kind of secondary literature they should read, or what other ancient sources they should read after they've read Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca. Well, Epictetus tells his Stoic students to go and read certain books, and one of them there is the Symposium of Xenophon. I believe the Stoics in the surviving sources refer to Xenophon about as much as they do to Plato, incidentally. I certainly believe that it's very important to read the Memorabilia and the Symposium of Xenophon. The Apology as well, incidentally, of Xenophon is worth reading. So, there's a couple of other interesting things that he says there, about how Socrates was particularly adept at quelling arguments. This is the main thing that Epictetus claims to admire about him, and he tells his students that they should model that and study it and put up with insults. And even today, this is something that people that are interested in Stoicism don't really seem to put as much emphasis on as they could. But it's right there in black and white in Epictetus and in the other Stoics as well, that philosophers like Socrates and the Stoics were thought to be good peacemakers. They were good at reuniting, reconciling friends and resolving quarrels that happened in relationships. So this stuff about Xanthippe is really quite important, because Socrates was good at smoothing over arguments in his own relationship. He was good at helping Lamprocles, his son, resolve arguments. There's a dialogue where Socrates resolves an argument between two of his closest friends. And in general, although he was executed by some people that are angry with him, Socrates was perceived as somebody who had this particular skill of asking very provocative, very penetrating questions, while nevertheless surprisingly avoiding it exploding. So he had this real knack of saying the unsayable and asking difficult questions without it turning into a blazing argument. I think it's very relevant today because we see people really lacking that skill and just getting into arguments on the internet a lot of the time. Whereas Socrates had this kind of fundamental skill, allegedly, to prevent arguments from turning bad and just turning into mudslinging or whatever. And it wasn't just him, the other philosophers were known for that, right down to Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius, we can see, was particularly adept at that. There are references in his private correspondence to Fronto where we can actually see him in the process of smoothing things over very adeptly, very diplomatically between his friends. And we can see in his writings that he believes that this is a skill as well, as is the ability to be unfazed by the insulting behaviour of other people. It doesn't mean to say not do something about it, but not to be particularly hurt or thrown off course by it, not to allow yourself to become angry by other people's provocative behaviour. So it's not something we normally associate with philosophy today, strangely, but in the ancient world, these are qualities that a philosopher was thought to have to possess, and Socrates was the kind of ultimate role model for that. He exemplified this ability to ask really tough, penetrating, upsetting questions while nevertheless remaining on good terms most of the time with the people that he was talking to. So to have a debate without it turning into an argument. Okay, so I hope that's helps you to kind of get a little bit more out of that comic strip. And as always, if you have any comments or questions about that, please feel free to post them underneath.